How you doing, eh? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Gimel, Daf 3 of Masechta Horayos. Friends, okay. Daf Gimel Masechta Horayos is going to be a difficult daf, friends. It's going to be a difficult daf. First of all, we have a lot of work to do still on Daf Beis and Beis. I stopped with a whole bunch of work to do on Daf Beis and Beis because it switches topics. Also, yesterday was long enough as it is with the introduction to Masechta Horayos and getting started. And this chunk that's left on Beis and Beis is a chunk. But it also leads into kind of the following discussion. So I thought it would make sense to kind of start with it today. But oh boy. I have an hour and 15 minutes until Shabbos. I feel like I'm not going to finish the daf before. I feel like I'm going to have to record this in 2 sittings. So, sheesh, Chaver, just get ready. I think it's going to be a long one. It's going to be a hard one. So, okay. The first chunk of today's daf is about determining the author of our mishnah. So as I had mentioned yesterday, so our mishnah had said that when it comes to Sanhedrin made a ruling that, let's say, a particular type of chelev is mutter, when in fact it was aser. And then an individual ate that chelev, let's say because they said, oh, well, Bezdin said this chelev is mutter, so this individual ate the chelev. Now, if the majority of Am Yisrael follows the ruling, then that's where we get into davar, shel, tzibur situation. But here we're just talking about an individual, not necessarily a majority of Klal Yisrael. An individual ate the chelev. So there's no davar, shel, tzibur. And our Mishnah says there's also no korban chatas. That if an individual ate this chelev, relying on the ruling of Sanhedrin, that Sanhedrin said you can eat this chelev is mutter, so this individual ate the chelev. So the author of our Mishnah had said that this individual would not have to bring a korban chatas, would be potter from bringing a korban chatas. Who is the author of our Mishnah? It's a machlekes. The other opinion would be to say that this individual does have to bring a korban chatas. There's no part, right? If the majority of the tzibur, if the majority of Am Yisrael, let's say, ends up eating this chelev, so there's paralem davar shel tzibur. So the paralem davar shel tzibur is offered, and then individuals don't need to offer their own korban chatas. There's the paralem davar shel tzibur. But when an individual, if it's only an individual, let's say, who eats the chelev, and there's no paralem davar shel tzibur being offered, so it's taka machlekes. Does the individual therefore bring a korban chatas or not? So our Mishnah had said not. Our Mishnah had said that if he ate the chelev based on the ruling of Bezdin, he would not bring a regular korban chatas. Who's the author of our Mishnah? That is the first chunk, big chunk of today's daf. And then the rest, and then we get into a lot of just technical details about paralem davar shel tzibur. Oof, real technical stuff. This is going to be a tough one. It's going to be, trust me, it's going to be a tough stuff. All right, but we can do tough stuff, right? Right. All right, so without further ado, here we go. All right, friends, we are going to begin. And Daf Beis Amud Beis, about, I'd say even slightly less than halfway through the Amud, and Daf Beis Amud Beis at the 2 dots, Zeh Klal Atol B'atzmo Chayiv. That the Mishnah had said that Zeh Klal, this is the rule, Atol B'atzmo Chayiv, that if somebody, let's say, were to eat chelev, not because they were relying upon the Sanhedrin who said it's mutter, but because they thought that they were able to eat it. They were totally ba'atzmo. They did it based on themselves. So then you would be chayav to bring a korban chatas. But if you did it based on the ruling of Bezdin, potter. So, says the Gemara, Lisuyim, when it says Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule. To include what? Lisuyim Vait Behora'ah. So when it says Zeh HaKlal, Hatol B'atzmo Chayiv, somebody who relies on himself, he's going to be chayiv to bring a korban Chades that includes a bo'et miva'id behorah. That's an interesting case. Miva'id behorah is somebody who does not like to accept authority, let's say. He likes to draw his own conclusions. He's not like an apikoris per se, or like a mumur or anything, but he likes to march to the beat of his own drama. And he likes to, he doesn't like to rely on the rabbis. He likes to draw his own conclusions. He's got a chumash, he's got a Rambam, a mishnah, a Gemara, whatever it is. He likes to make his own decisions. So he made his own decision that this particular chalif was mutter. Honestly, just like the Sanhedrin decided. Sanhedrin came to the conclusion this particular chalif is mutter. They made a mistake, but they came to that conclusion. He also came to that conclusion that this particular chalif is mutter. He came to a conclusion on his own, and he ate the chalif. So he's not eating the chalif because he relied on Sanhedrin. He does his own thing. So he ended up eating this chalif because he does his own thing. Even though it happens to be that the Sanhedrin at the time had also said it's okay, but it ended up being incorrect. He needs to bring a korban chatas. So if a person would have eaten this chalif based on the fact that the Sanhedrin had ruled that it's okay, potter from a korban chatas according to the Tana of our Mishnah. But if he ate the chalif because he decided that this chalif was mutter, he has to bring a korban chatas. Okay. Tola bebezdin the surye, what we said is that tola be'atzmo is chayv, and tola bebezdin we said does not have to bring a korban chatas. So tola bebezdin the surye horu bezdin v'yodu shatos, when it says that if one is relying upon bezdin, right, that this is the rule, that one who relies on bezdin does not have to bring a korban chatas. So what is that coming to include? So it is coming to include horu bezdin v'yodu shato, that if bezdin said a particular type of chalif, for example, is mutter, and then they realized, shoot, we made a mistake, right? And we said yesterday, right, they didn't just say it's mutter, but they said it's mutter, go eat it. Then they realized they made a mistake. Oh, shucks. And so they retracted, but this Yidala didn't know about the retraction. And in that, so this Yidala would be potter. He wouldn't have to bring a korban chatas. Even though Bezdin had already retracted, but he didn't know, he's potter. He doesn't have to bring a korban chatas. But this is mamish. It's a mishnah. It's the very next mishnah. And Daf Yomi Horayos. We're not going to get to it today. I believe my plan, I think, is to start with that tomorrow. But it's the very next mishnah. Now, what does the mishnah say? Horu bezdin v'yodu shatov v'chazu boen be'cheviu kaparos v'shleviu kaparos v'chwas alpianim shim potter. So the mishnah already says that in that case he would be pot. He wouldn't have to bring a korban. If the bezdin ruled and they already retracted, he didn't know, he'd be potter. So we have a mishnah that already says it. Tani v'adam mufadeh. You mufarish. Einachinam. Our mishnah says zeh klal atol be'atzmuchayv atol bebezdin potter, and then the next mishnah goes on to expand upon, to explain what is the scenario of zeh klal atol bebezdin is potter. It's talking about this. The mishnah then explains it's talking about the scenario where bezdin ruled this particular chayil was mutter. They then realized they made a mistake. They retracted. This person didn't know he's potter. Okay, so in that scenario where bezdin realized they made a mistake, this guy didn't get the memo. He ate the chalif because he was relying upon bezdin. He's potter. He does not have to bring a korban chatas. Okay, and now the tricky part begins. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Zodiv Rav Yehuda. Aval chamram yochachos baraz bezdin chayv. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Zodiv Rav Yehuda. So it says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, who is the author of our mishnah, right? Who is the one who says that an individual who eats this chalev based on the ruling of the Sanhedrin does not have to bring a korban chatos? The answer is that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but the Chachamim disagree, and they say he would have to bring a korban chatos. That an individual who eats this chalev relying on the psak of the Sanhedrin would bring a korban chatas. There's no parlam davar shel tzibur over there. She's just an individual who ate this chelib. Again, assuming that this is the ruling that they gave about chelib. So he's an individual. He ate the chelib. There's no parlam davar shel tzibur because that's only if it's a majority of the congregation. So there's no parlam davar shel tzibur, and he brings a korban chatas. Okay. So again, Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Zodiv Rabbi Yehuda, the author of our mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Aval Chacham Robin, but the Chachamim say Yachid Shasa Bara is Bezdin, that an individual who ate this cheleb because he was relying upon the ruling of the Sanhedrin, Chayav, he would have to bring a korban chatas. My Rabbi Yehuda, how do we know that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that he's potter from bringing a korban chatas? The sanya that we learn in a brisa, Im nefesh achas techto bishgogo ba'asosa. This is the pasuk by a korban chatas. A korban chatas. Now remember, a korban chatas is by definition for an individual. A korban chatas is which is a regular korban chatas is for an individual. So now, oh sheesh, these flies are like absolutely everywhere. Hopefully they're going to go away soon. It's insane. I think it's like essentially like fly season or something. It's insane. Driving me nuts. Now, where were we? So this is a pasuk by korban chatas. So it says in the pasuk by korban chatas, im nefesh achas techta ba'asosa. So he learns out, Arig Elu Gimel, he learns out three things from that pasuk, right? The drush is be'etzim nefesh techta, achas techta, ba'asosa techta. He basically learns out three. So from those, I think 6 words. Im nefesh achas techta bishgaga ba'asosa. From those, I think 6 words, 2, 4, 6 words. He learns out three things. One of them being, there are 3 exceptions. One of them being, haosem mi pi'atz mochayev baraz bezdin potter. That one who acts based on the ruling of Bezdin, for example, if he eats cheleb, because Sanhedrin had ruled that the cheleb is mutter, he's potter. He doesn't bring a korban chatas. That is one of the 3 exceptions. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in that brisa that this is actually the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, nor does it say in the following brisa that we're about to learn that it's the opinion of the Chacham. We're going to get to that at the bottom of the Amud. But anyways, suffice it to say for now that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and that, in exception to a korban chatas, a place where you would not bring the korban chatas, is an individual who, let's say, ate cheleb, because the Sanhedrin had ruled that this particular cheleb is mutter. Okay, and therefore we want to say that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of our mishnah. My Rabbanon, what is the opinion of the rabbis? Where do we see that the rabbi's opinion is that this individual who ate cheleb, relying on the psak of the Sanhedrin that it's actually mutter, how do we know that he would bring a korban chatas? The sign that we learn in the Brisa Adayin and the Omer, I say, oh sheesh, okay, oh sheesh, Chav, this is a tricky Brisa. Chav, this is a tricky Brisa. I need you to. What do I need you to do? I need you to be patient. We're going to work through this slowly. It's a tricky Brisa. I'm telling you, it's a tricky Brisa. Now, before we get to this Brisa, I want to clarify some terms. I want us to get on the same page with some terms. Shigagas maise and shigagas hora'ah. Chaver, these are important terms. Sheesh. Okay. These are important terms. Shigagas maise is that's like a classic case of sholik, right? So, for example, you thought forget about parlam davar shel bezdin, shel tzibur, and Horayos. Just stam a case of a person thought he was eating shuman. He ate chelev. He found out later on he ate chelev. Didn't realize at the time. Brings the korban chatas. Shigagas maise. Classic case of inadvertence. Shigagas hora'ah is what we've been talking about, is a person who accidentally eats chaylev because he was relying upon the psak of the Sanhedrin that they had said that this particular chaylev was mutter, that shigigas hora, that the mistake was based, that they were relying on the ruling of the Sanhedrin. So shigigas maise is just like a kind of a regular case of shogeg. Shigigas hora is relying upon the ruling of Bezdin, and that was the mistake. And there's also going to be distinctions between individuals versus the congregation, right? So, of course, by paralim davar shel tzibur, that's when the congregation follows the ruling and the majority of the people follow the ruling, and therefore there's a paralim davar shel tzibur, versus an individual where there's no paralim davar shel tzibur when it comes to shigigas hora'ah. Okay. Now, I'm going to explain this brisa essentially based on how it's going to be explained. I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to explain this brisa based on how it's going to be explained. Here we go. Are you ready? The Tanya we learned in brisa. I say, miut kahal shechatu chayavin. That I'm going to refer to miut kahal as individuals. I hope that's accurate. Individuals who sin what? Shigigas maise or shigigas hora? Shigigas maise. I'll say that individuals who sin b'shigigas maise chayovin are chayiv to bring a korban chatas. Okay, a person thinks he's eating shuman, he eats chaylev, didn't realize, brings a korban chatas. She'ein bezdin meviin al yedein par. How come? Well, because she'ein bezdin meviin al yedein par. Because when they make a mistake, b'shigigas hora'ah, because when it's shigigas hora'ah, when they eat chaylev, because they were relying upon the psak of Sanhedrin, there would be no par helem davar shel tzibur. And because by shigigas hora'ah, by an individual, there is no par helem davar shel tzibur. Therefore, by shigigas hora'ah, there is a regular korban chatas for individuals by shigigas hora'ah. And therefore, since there is a korban chatas by individuals by shigigas hora'ah, therefore there is also a korban chatas for individuals by shigigas maise. I told you it's a complex brisa. It's complex. We haven't even scraped the surface yet. I'm going to read that again, okay? There's a lot there. Remember, shigigas maise, shigigas hora'ah, par helim davar shel tzibur, regular korban chatas. There's a lot there, Chevra. I'm going to read it again. The Tanya that we learned in the brisa. Adayin ani omer. I say, miut kol shechatu, individuals that sinned b'shigigas maise, chayovin need to bring a regular korban chatas, because when it comes to shigigas hora'ah, she'ein bezdin mevin al yedein par, that there's no par helem davar shel tzibur when it comes to shigigas hora'ah by individuals, and since there's no par helem davar shel tzibur by individuals by shigigas hora'ah, there is a korban chatos for individuals by shigigas hora'ah, right? There's no par helem davar shel tzibur, but there is a korban chatos for individuals by hora'ah. And by extension, there is also a korban chatos by individuals by shigigas maise. Rov kahal, now going to the majority of the congregation, shechatu, that they sinned, b'shigigas maise, yehu peturin, I would argue that they should be potter. That rov kahal, majority of the congregation, rov kahal, by shigigas maise. So if you have a majority of the congregation, I thought that they were eating shuman, turns out that they were eating chaylev, nothing to do with paralim davar shel tzibur, nothing to do with Sanhedrin. shigigas maise, I would argue that they should all be potter. They should not have to bring individual korban chatases. Shari bezdin mevin ayideim par, because when it comes to shigigas hora'ah, that if the rov tzibur, rov kol, ate chelev, because they were relying upon the psak of the Sanhedrin, Shari Bezdin Mevin al Yideim Par, Bezdin would bring a par elim davar shel tzibur, and therefore they would not bring individual korban chat. This is when it comes to shigigas hora'ah. If rov kol ate chelev because they're relying upon the psak of the Sanhedrin, shigigas hora'ah. So in that case, there would be a par elim davar shel tzibur, and there would not be individual korban chatases. So we want to say that by extension, also by shigigas maise, by rov kahal, there should not be individual korban chatases. Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says by korban chatos. Let's read the pasuk. I'm reading the pasuk. V'im nefesh achas techda b'shkaga. This is by korban chatos. Me'am ha'aretz. So it says me'am ha'aretz back in the Gemara. Afilu ruba v'afilu kula. So when the pasuk says me'am ha'aretz by a regular korban chatos, it's coming to teach that when it comes to shigigas maise, even if a majority or even if everybody, the whole Israel, ate cheleb by accident, nothing to do with Sanhedrin, but shigigas maise. Me'am ha'aretz, it says by korban chatos, me'am ha'aretz, to teach that in such a situation, even when it's rov tzibur, they would all bring korban chatases. Wow. Sheesh. I'm going to say that again outside. So the ratio of the Brisa had said that when it comes to shigigas maise by an individual, the individual would bring a korban chatos, because by shigigas hora'ah there would be no paralim davar shel tzibur, but there would be a korban chatos by shigigas hora'ah, and by extension there would be a korban chatos by shigigas maise. Now we had a havmina to say that by rov kahal, since by shigigas hora'ah there would be a paralim davar shel tzibur, and therefore there would not be individual korban chatases. Therefore we had the havmina to say that there would also not be individual korban chatases if rov tzibur did shigigas maise. Therefore the pasuk says me'am ha'aretz by shigigas maise, by regular korban chatas, to say that even if it's rov kahal, there still would be individual korban chatases by shigigas maise. So now the Gemara is going to explain the Brisa essentially as I already explained it. So b'mai, what is the Brisa talking about? Ilema b'shigigas maise. Let me just make sure I didn't skip anything. Okay, fine. Right. Fine. B'mai, what are we talking about? Ilema b'shigigas maise. Okay, if we're talking about shigigas maise, okay, skip the next two words, well, the abbreviation bezdin. So ilema, this, I mentioned yesterday that like the text of Horayos needs some work. We're gonna have to work through this text. So read the brackets, but without the first words. So ilema b'shigigas maise shelo be'ora. Okay. So if we're talking about shigigas maise, we're not talking about shigigas hora'ah. Well, then why are we talking about bezdin ma'avid tayu? Shelo b'ora'as bezdin mimaisu shelo b'ora'ah. What a weird phrase. But basically, if you look back to the beginning of the Brisa, what did it say? Adayin ani omer miut kol shechatu chayavin. Right? If we're talking about shigas, let's go back to the beginning of the Brisa, as I just did. Right? So we said, well, if it's talking about shigas maise, which I explained, it is talking about shigas maise. But but let's read it. The Tanya. Adayin ani omer. I'm reading from the beginning of the Brisa. Miut kol shechatu. If an individual sinned b'shigas maise chayavin, they have to bring a korban chata. She'ein bezdin mevin ayideim par. Because bezdin is not bringing a paralim davar shel tzibur. So the Gemara says, well, if we're saying that it's talking about shigigas ma'aseh, then why are we even talking about parlam davar shel tzibur? Parlam davar shel tzibur memela is obviously only by shigigas hora, not by shigigas ma'aseh, right? So I had explained it as kilu, we're talking about shigigas ma'aseh, but the point is that Bezdin would not bring a parlam davar by shigigas. If it were shigigas hora, then Bezdin would not be bringing a parlam davar shel tzibur since it's only an individual. Anyways, we'll get there. So again, I'm going to read this again jump back to where we just started a minute ago. If we're talking about shigigas ma'aseh, skip the next two words. Shelo be'oraya. We're not talking about shigigas hora. We're talking about shigigas ma'aseh. But if that's the case, then why are we talking about parlam davar shel tzibur bichlal? Bezdin ma'avid tayu. Shelo b'oraz bezdin mimaisu shelo b'ora. Why we're talking about shigigas ma'aseh? We're not talking about shigigas hora. So then, therefore, why are we talking about anybody bringing a parlam davar shel tzibur? That's by shigigas hora. That's when Sanhedrin made a mistake. Ella be'ora. They would okay, fine. So ella b'ora, I think maybe it means so. Okay, so rather we're talking about shigigas hora. Okay. But vaki ksiv me'am ha'aretz b'shigigas ma'asu dichsiv. But in the seifa of the brisa, when we talk about am ha'aretz, right, that pasuk of am ha'aretz is by shigigas ma'aseh. It's by regular korban chatas. It's not talking about shigigas hora. So when shigigas ma'aseh, am ha'aretz, right, that even if the rov call, even if the majority of the congregation sinned, they would still bring individual korban chatases. So this is what it's saying. Miut kol shechatu, if individuals sin, so if an individual accidentally eats chelib, nothing to do with Sanhedrin. Miut kol shechatu, b'shigigas ma'aseh. So if an individual inadvertently sinned b'shigigas ma'aseh, nothing to do with Sanhedrin, just he thought he was eating shuman, he ate chelib. Chayavin needs to bring a korban chatas. It's chayav to bring a korban chatas because when it comes to shigigas hora, she'ein bezdin meviin al yedein par behora. Because if individuals were to eat chelev relying upon the psak of the Sanhedrin shigigas hora, there would be no parlam davar shel tzibur since they're simply individuals. But the individuals, by shigigas hora'ah, would be chayiv to be a korban chatas. So by shigigas hora'ah, when it's individuals, there's no parlam davar shel tzibur, but by shigigas hora'ah, they would have to bring their own korban chatases. And since by shigigas hora'ah, they would have to bring their own korban chatases, so also by shigigas ma'aseh, they have to bring their own korban chatases. Okay, we're not done yet, but just to point out, so we see that this brisa is saying that individuals by shigigas hora do bring are chayiv to bring korban chatases. Okay, now continues the brisa. Yachol rov tzibur she'asu b'shigigas ma'aseh. Okay, now if we talk about rov tzibur, if they did b'shigigas ma'aseh, if they all thought they were eating shuman but they ate chelev, Yehu Peturin, is it possible that they will be potter from bringing individual korban chatases? Sharei, because when it comes to shigigas hora'ah, bezdin mevin aleim par be'ora'ah, when it comes to shigigas hora'ah, there is a parlam davar shel tzibur when we're talking about the rov call, and because there's a parlam davar shel tzibur, there are no individual korban chatases by shigigas hora'ah. So maybe we should extend that to shigigas ma'aseh and to say that by rov call, there's also no individual korban chatases. So therefore, Talmud lomer me'am ha'aretz. Therefore, the pasuk says me'am ha'aretz by individual korban chatases, by korban chatas, that afilu rubo, that even if we're talking about rov kahal, still, if it's shigigas ma'aseh, they would bring individual korban chatases. So what do we see? So we see that according to this brisa, individuals by shigigas hora'ah are bringing korban chatases. Amar Rav Papa mimai. Rav Papa, however, suggests, or plays devil's advocate, whatever he says. Wait, how do you know? Maybe actually, when it comes to individuals, by shigigas hora'ah, just like there's no parelim davar shel tzibur, maybe there's also not a regular korban chatas. Right? By shigigas hora'ah, there's no parelim davar shel tzibur by individuals. Maybe just like there's no parelim davar shel tzibur, there's also no regular korban chatas, and therefore by extension, by shigigas ma'aseh, also by individuals, there's no korban chatas. So Amar Papa, this is a Papa Mimai. How do we know this? Dilma lohein v'lo bezdin. Maybe by shigigas hora'ah, neither the individuals nor bezdin bring a korban, neither parelim davar shel tzibur nor a regular korban chatas, and by extension, neither nor by shigigas ma'aseh, there also would not be korban chatas there. If that's so, if that's the case, that by shigigas hora'ah, just like there's no parelim davar shel tzibur, there's also no individual korban chatas by shigigas hora'ah, and by extension, there's no korban chatas by shigigas ma'aseh, by individuals. So if that's the case, well, my area de kamehader al ruba lichyuva. Why is the brisa jumping straight to trying to figure out how do we know that there's a chiyuv korban chatos by rov kol by shigigas ma'aseh? We have more basic things to answer for, like how do we know that there's a korban chatos by individuals by shigigas ma'aseh? And from the fact that we go straight to trying to figure out how do we know rov kol brings korban chatas by shigigas ma'aseh, lav michlal, does that not imply demiut bilra kaima le demichayvu bilra? Does that not imply that what we already know, that when it comes to shigigas hora'ah, there's no parelim davar shel tzibur by individuals, but there is individual korban chatases by shigigas hora'ah by individuals, and by extension by shigigas ma'aseh as well? Because if not, v'nehader b'reisha al mi'uta demechai b'shigigas ma'aseh, because if that were not the case, then before jumping into rov kol, trying to figure out how do we know that there's a individual chiyuv chatases by shigigas ma'aseh, we should first v'nehader b'reisha first al mi'uta demichayev b'shigigas ma'aseh, that we should first try to figure out how do we know that individuals would be chayiv to bring a korban chatos by shigigas ma'aseh, ulevasof nehader al ruba lichyuva b'shigigas ma'aseh, and only afterwards try to figure out how do we know that by shigigas ma'aseh rov tzibur would bring korban chatos. Ela lav. Rather, it must be that from the fact that the brisa is not trying to figure out how we know that individuals bring a korban chatos by shigigas ma'aseh, and goes straight to trying to figure out how do we know rov kol by shigigas ma'aseh that they bring korban chatases. Midelo mahada al miut demechayven b'shigigas ma'aseh. From the fact that we aren't trying to figure out how we know that individuals bring a korban chatas by shigigas ma'aseh, uvasof mahadar aruba lechyuva, and we either, and then in the end try to figure out rov kol by shigigas ma'aseh, b'shigigas ma'aseh shmamino miut bara chayovin hein kisba v'sira. What it must be is that when it comes to shigigas hora'ah by individuals, there's no parelim davar shel tzibur. There is a korban chatos by an individual by shigigas hora'ah, and by extension, there is a korban chatos for individuals by shigigas ma'aseh, and we don't need to learn that out separately, and we can focus straight on trying to figure out how do we know that there are individual korban chatases for rov tzibur by shigigas ma'aseh v'shelo. So mishmamim miot be'ora'ah chayovin hein kisba v'sira, they chayav a korban chatas, a she sheep or a she goat, v'shelo be'ora'ah miut be'ora'ah v'shelo be'ora'ah v'shigigas ma'aseh, and when it's not be'ora'ah v'shigigas ma'aseh chayovin, they're also chayav to bring a korban chatas, right? By shigigas hora'ah, So we see that by shigigas hora'ah, there's no parlem davar shel tzibur. There is a korban chatas by individuals by shigigas hora'ah, and by extension also by shigigas ma'aseh there is a korban chatas. So what do we see? We see that by shigigas hora'ah, by an individual, there is a korban chatas. Shish cheve. That was a very difficult brisa. A very difficult brisa. It was a very difficult Gemara. It needed a lot of work to work through that Gemara and add missing words and figure out how to fit in different phrases. And sheesh, that was a piece of work. And this is why I did not do this yesterday at the end of the daf. Yesterday was a long day. We're starting a new Masechta. This was not a way to end the first daf of Masechta Horayos. But how long have I been recording for? I've been recording for about 45 minutes, it looks like. And we're not even on today's daf yet. I said it's going to be a long one. Wow. Okay, new. So where are we? So where we are is, we're trying to figure out the author of our mishnah, our mishnah said that by shigigas hora'ah, an individual does not bring a korban. He was relying upon the psak of the Sanhedrin. He does not bring a korban chatas. So who's the author of that mishnah? We said it's Rabbi Yehuda, and that the Chacham, however, disagree and say that he would bring a korban chatas, as we just saw in this very intricate and elaborate brisa. Now, says the Gemara Michte, let's see, Tavayu Stomitnan. Right, as I pointed out earlier, I think, both of these brises are unattributed. The first brisa doesn't say anything about Rabbi Yehuda. So, how do we know that the first brisa is Rabbi Yehuda and the second brisa is the Chacham? I'll say punkt fakert. The first brisa is the Chacham. It's the Chacham's opinion to say that an individual by shigas hora'ah is potter from a korban chatas, and it's Rabbi Yehuda who says chayiv. How do we know? So man shamas le de darish miute ki hai gavno. Well, stylistically, it's Rabbi Yehuda's style. If you remember the first brisa, it said, "Im nefesh achas techto b'shkoga ba'asosa arei elu gimel miyutin kilu nefesh techto achas techto b'shkoga ba'asosa techto." That's Rabbi Yehuda's style to kind of learn out those three miyutin in such a way. The Tanya we learn in the brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, zos toras ha'ola hi. That when it says Zos is a miyut, ha'ola is a miyut, he is also a miyut. Hare'elu shlosha miyut, and these are three miyuts. So we see that that's Rabbi Yehuda's style to kind of look at a phrase like that and to pull out the miyuts, the exceptions. Therefore, it makes sense to say that the first brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. V'baisem, alternatively, Adayin ani omer, the second brisa of the Chachamim, lo motzis mukmas lo Rabbi Yehuda, cannot be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Dekatani rov kol shechatu bezdin mevin aidein par. You know why? Because it says in that brisa that when the majority, right, if by shigigas hora'ah, by rov kol, bezdin brings a parlem davar shel tzibur. Right? What did the brisa say? Adayin ani omer miut kol shechatu chayim she'ein bezdin mevin aidein par. Rov kol shechatu yuktun jari bezdin mevin aidein par. Right, as I mentioned yesterday, maybe I mentioned it today, I can't remember, that it's a machlokas about who exactly offers the parlem davar shel tzibur. So it's the opinion of Reb Meir. It's the opinion of Reb Meir that it's the Sanhedrin themselves who offer the parlem davar shel tzibur. Reb Yehuda disagrees, though. Reb Yehuda says that it's the tribes themselves are the ones to offer the parlem davar shel tzibur, and therefore, from the fact that the brisa is talking about the Sanhedrin offering the parlem davar shel tzibur, memele it's not Rabbi Yehuda. Again, v'baisemo adayin ani omer, the second brisa of adayin ani omer that starts adayin ani omer, lo motzes mukmas lo Rabbi Yehuda, cannot be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Katanik, because it says in that brisa, rov kol shechatu, when the majority of the tzibur sins, bezdin mevin aidein par. It's the Sanhedrin that brings the parlem davar shel tzibur. V'i Rabbi Yehuda, and if we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda, ha'omer tzibur udemaisi bezdin. Low. Rabbi Yehuda says it's the congregation, the individual tribes, the 12 tribes each bring a parlem davar shel tzibur, 12 parlem davar shel tziburs. The Tanan, as we learn in a mishnah and Daf Hey, Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Shiva Shvatim Shechatu, Mevim Zayin Parim. If 7 of the 12 tribes sin, they bring 7 cows. And not only that, then the other 5 Shvatim who didn't sin also bring the Parim davar shel tzibur. So it's the people who bring the Parim davar shel tzibur, not the Sanhedrin. From the fact that the Brisa is talking about the Sanhedrin, the Mele it's not Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, the first Brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. The second Brisa is the Chacham, and Rabbi Yehuda therefore is the author of our Mishnah, who says that an individual who did based on Horas Bezdin does not bring a korban chatas. Now says the Gemara of Rav Nachman or Shmuel, says Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, Zo, this is the opinion of Rab Meir, that the author of our Mishnah, who says that an individual by Shigas Hora does not bring a korban chatas, is Rab Meir. But as we said, the Chachamim would say that an individual by Horaz Bez Bashigas Hora is chayiv to bring a korban chatas. My Reb Meir, what's this machlokes Reb Meir and the Rabbanon? The Sani that we learn in the Brisa, horu ve'asu. If they taught and if they ruled and they did, who ruled? Who did? Talking about the Sanhedrin, we're talking about maybe the Sanhedrin Gadol, we're talking about Sanhedrin for individual tribes. Also, who did? The Sanhedrin, the people, the tribe, who most people, some people, who are we talking about? Reb Meir says Potter. The Chacham say Chayv. Well, what are we talking about? Who's Potter? Potter for what? What are we talking about? Man Osu. Okay, so who's doing anything? Who's doing anything? Elim, a Bezdin. Bezdin is doing. Bezdin is doing. Bezdin's eating the chel. My time of Rabbanon de Mechayve. But if that's the case, that Bezdin is the one eating the chelev, Bezdin's making the ruling, Bezdin's eating the chelev, why would the Chachamim say chayev to bring a parallel and davar shel tzibur? Vatana we learned by say Yachol Horu Bezdin Va'asu Bezdin Yachu Chayavin. Is it possible in a scenario where Bezdin made the ruling and Bezdin, right? Bezdin, let's say, made a ruling about chelev, and Bezdin then ate the chelev. Yachu Chayavin. Is it possible that they will be chayav to bring parallel and davar shel tzibur? Tamlomar Hakol Va'asu. The people do. Ma'aseh Tali B'Kol V'Ra Tali B'Bezdin. The doing is for the people, and the ruling is for the court, is for the Sanhedrin. So we're not talking about the Sanhedrin ruling and the Sanhedrin doing. Ella, Horu Bezdin, the Sanhedrin ruled for also Rov Koho, and the majority of the people then ate chelev. But my time is Reb Meir the Potter. If the majority of the people are eating chelev, why would Reb Meir say there's no parallel davar shel tzibur? Of course there's a parallel davar shel tzibur there. Elalab, Horu Bezdin v'asu miut kol. So let's say it's talking about where Bezdin gave the ruling, Sanhedrin gave the ruling, and individuals ate chelev. And here, and therein lies the machlokes. Reb Meir says, Potter, it doesn't have to bring a korban chatas. The individual does not bring a korban chatas, and the Chacham say chayiv that the individual would bring a korban chatas by shigigas hora. That Reb Meir says that a yochid sha'asa b'oraz bezdin by shigas hora Potter does not bring a korban chatas. So myself and the Chacham say yochid sha'asa b'oraz bezdin, that an individual, right, by shigas hora chayiv does bring a korban chatas. Amar Rab Papa, says Rab Papa, T'chuli amu yochid she'asa b'oraz bezdin Potter. No, you could say both Rab Meir and the Chachamim agree. You could argue that both Rab Meir and the Chachamim agree that yochid she'asa b'oraz bezdin shigigas hora by an individual Potter does not have to bring a korban chatas. Interesting. Ele bezdin mashtem lo of tzibur kamifli. The machlokes here is about something else. The machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim, Potter, Chayav, is talking about if 50% of the congregation ate chelev, and Bezdin also ate chelev. The question is, can they tip the scale to make it the majority so that there will be a parallel davar shel tzibur? Reb Meir says Potter. No, they don't skip tip the scale, there's no pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. The Chacham say chayav that they do tip the scale, and there is a pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. Ma'asaver bezdin mashlim dov tzibur, the Chacham, u'ma'asaver ein bezdin mashlim dov tzibur. Reb Meir says bezdin is not mashlim, therefore there's no pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. V'ba'isema, alternatively, horu bezdin v'asu rubo shel kol. Wow. You could say it's talking about where the Sanhedrin said a particular type of chaylev, let's say, is mutter. V'asu rubo shel kol, and most of the people then ate chaylev. Okay, well, if that's the case, then there's a pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, right? So what's potter, what's chayiv, what are we talking about? So this, Uman Chacham Reb Shimoni de Omer tzibur maisi ubezdin maisi. Wow. We're going to see on Daf Yomi Horayos, right? I had mentioned that there's a whole question of who's the one that actually brings the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. Reb Meir's opinion is that it's the bezdin brings the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, not the people, just the bezdin. That's Reb Meir's opinion. Reb Shimon says the congregation also brings the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur in addition to the bezdin. So, for example, if 7 of the 12 tribes ate the chaylev, so those 7 tribes would each bring a pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, and the bezdin would as well. Whereas Reb Meir says no, only bezdin brings pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, not any of the people. So when Reb Meir says potter, he's saying the people are potter. Only the Sanhedrin brings the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, not the people. They're potter. And Reb Shimon says chayav, the people are also chayav. The 7 tribes in that case would also be chayav to bring a pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. Wow, their own pa'ilim davar shel tziburs. So again, by saying mahoru bezdin the also rubo shel kol, bezdin ruled that chaylev is a particular type of chaylev is permitted, and then let's say 7 out of the 12 tribes ate the chaylev. Uman Chacham, who's the Chacham that are saying chayav? Reb Shimoni. It's the opinion of Reb Shimon de Omer tzibur maisi uvezdin maisi, that in addition to bezdin bring the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, right? Reb Meir says only bezdin brings the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur. The tzibur themselves will be potter. But Reb Shimon says that in addition to bezdin bring the pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, the 7 tribes would also bring pa'ilim davar shel tzibur, and that's what the chayav. So Reb Shimon, so the Chacham is Reb Shimon who's saying chayav, meaning the people also bring it. Reb Meir says potter, that it's only the Sanhedrin, not the people. V'ba'isema, alternatively, shevet she'asa baraz bezdino. Okay, right, as I had mentioned, it's also a question, who is the Sanhedrin? Are we talking about the Sanhedrin Gedola in the Lishkas Hagazis? Maybe we're talking about individual bezdins of individual shevets. So Reb Yehuda's opinion is that even individual Sanhedrins of individual shevets could be mechayib pa'ilim davar shel tziburs. Uman Chacham Reb Yehuda. There you go. Who's the Chacham? So Reb Yehuda's opinion, the Tana that we learn in the Brisa. Shevet she'asa baraz bezdino, a tribe that did based on the ruling of its own bezdin. HaShevet chayiv. The shevet is chayiv. So Reb Meir says the shevet would be potter, but Reb Yehuda argues and says the shevet would be chayiv. V'ba'isema, alternatively, kugon shechatu shisha. For example, if 6 of the tribes, 6 out of the 12 tribes ate the chaylev, then rubo shel kol, but the 6 tribes are actually the majority of the population of Israel. Oh, Shiva, or 7 tribes ate the chaylev, which is the majority of the tribes, but afal pi she'ein and rubo shel kol, even if though they might not actually be numerically the majority of the of Israel. Masisir Mani Reb Shimon ben Elazari, and who is the Chachamim Kilu? Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The Tana of learner by Reb Shimon ben Elazar almost says Reb Shimon ben Elazar Mishmo in actually Reb Meir's name. Chatu Shisha vein Rubo shel kol o Shiva afal pi she'ein on Rubo shel kol chayavin. They would be chayavin. So you could say that when the Chacham is saying chayav, it's talking about that there would be a pa'ilim davar shel tzibur even in the scenario where it's 6 tribes, but they're numerically the majority, or 7 tribes, even though they're not numerically the majority. No, so where are we at? Well, Rav Nachman and Shmuel wanted to say that it's the opinion of Rav Meir, that it's the opinion of Rav Meir, that Yochid that did B'shigig Asara would be potter from bringing a korban chatas and chom sechai, but we said not necessarily. We gave a million other explanations to that brisa. Amar Ravasi says Ravasi Ba'ora Halichacha Rov Yoshvei Eretz Yisrael. Okay, when it comes to Shigig Asara, and we're determining if there's been a parallel davar shel tzibur, the majority of the people is based on the people living in Eretz Yisrael, where I live. Baruch Hashem, Shenemar Vayash Shloimo Ba'isayis Achog. This was after the inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash. Shloimo made at that time Sukkis v'chol Yisrael imo, all of Israel with him. Kol Gadol, a great kahal, right? Kahal, rov kahal. Milavo Chamos. Anacham Mitzrayim, from the Chamas till now, from Nacham Mitzrayim, Lefnei Hashem, Lekinu Shivasam, Shivasam, Arba, so Yomichdek, Sivachol Yisrael, Imo, Kol Gadol. It says that all the Yidden were with him in Eretz Yisrael. So Milavo Chamas ad Nacham Mitzrayim, Lomadi. Why do I need to say Milavo Chamas, Nacham Mitzrayim? Why do I need to give the coordinates? They were in Eretz Yisrael, obviously. Lomadi Shmamina Hani Udekre Kol, Havahanach Lekre Kol. What it's saying is that the people in Eretz Yisrael are what was called the Kohol Gadol, but not outside of Eretz Yisrael. I think I'm going to have to. Shabbos is mamash starting. I was right. It's been an hour and 20 minutes that I've been recording, and I'm still on Gimel Amud Aleph. I knew this was going to be a hard one. It took me ages. It's been. I was kind of hoping that Horayos would go a little faster. There's no Tosfos, but it has not been going faster. This has been work. Horayos has been work. So I don't know. I'm going to have to pick this up. I don't even know when. Maybe Sunday. I'm perpetually behind these days. Okay, it is now Sunday afternoon, I think, and we are going to go weiter. Pshita, it is obvious that Ruben v'nis maitu anu pluktu to Shimon v'Rabbanon. Sheesh. Wow, jumping right into it. All right. Well, this is a difficult daf, huh? It's like relentless. Okay. There's a machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Rabbanon when it comes to a Kohen Mashiach and a Kohen and a par Kohen Mashiach and a Sar Nasi. Right. So these are. Oh, here are the flies. They're getting this fly situation is getting better, but they're still here, unfortunately. Yeah, it's been hard to solve it because it's not entirely clear what's attracting them. But anyways. This is going to be more of the focus of the second and third prakim of Masechta, the short, brief Masechta of Horayos. Now, there is a concept of a par Kohen Mashiach. The Kohen Mashiach is the Kohen Gadol, a particular kind of Kohen Gadol. There's two ways to become a Kohen Gadol. One is with the anointing oils that they had from the Mishkan through the first Beis Hamikdash. The other way to become a Kohen Gadol is to just put on the big day kahuna and get to work. So in the second temple, they did not have the Shemen HaMishcha. So that is what they would do. You became the Kohen Gadol by just dressing like the Kohen Gadol and getting to work. However, when we talk about the Par Kohen Mashiach, it is specifically the type of Kohen Gadol who is anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. Anyway, so we'll get more into the details, really more in the next parak. But suffice it to say that a Kohen Gadol, really Kohen Mashiach, when he sins, let's just say, so rather than bringing a korban chatas, he brings a par Kohen Mashiach. Okay, now this would of course only be once he is the Kohen Gadol. What if he sinned prior to becoming Kohen Gadol? The same thing for a Seir Nasi. The Nasi is the king in this context. And if he sins, instead of bringing a regular korban chatas, which is a Seira or a Kisba, a she-goat or a she-sheep, the king brings a Sair, a goat. It's the Sair Nasi. So now, there's a machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim about what happens if the Kohen Gadol or the king sinned prior to being appointed to their position. The question is, do they what do? Do they bring a korban chatas like prior to their appointment? So the Chachamim say that yes, we go based on the right, if the sin happened before, or if they were chayim korban chatas before they were appointed, so they bring a regular korban chatas. Reb Shimon says it depends on the knowledge. That not only did they sin before, if not only did they sin before being appointed, but they also were aware of their sin prior to being appointed, then they would bring a korban chatas. But otherwise, if they were unaware at the time of their appointment of their sin, then they wouldn't have to bring anything at all. So now, says the Gemara now, in a situation of mirubin v'nismaitu, so if the majority of the nation sinned in accordance with the ruling of the Bezdin, of the Sanhedrin, so Sanhedrin ruled that a particular type of chalev is mutter, and the congregation said, okay, great, and they all ate that kind of stuff. And they all ate the chalev. But then some of them died. Some of them died. And now, all of a sudden, when looking at absolute numbers, it's no longer, I guess if we're going based on absolute numbers, it's no longer the majority. If we look now at Am Yisrael, the amount of people who sinned are no longer the majority. So this is machlokas between Reb Shimon and the Chacham. The Chacham would say, well, we go based on at the time of the sin, they were the majority. So therefore, there would be, there would be a parlam davar shel tzibur. Reb Shimon would say, well, it's dependent on if they were also aware, right? Were they not only a majority of the people who ate this chalev, but also we were aware that there was this majority. But if we were unaware until after the people died and they were no longer a majority, they were now a minority, there wouldn't be a parlam davar shel tzibur. So in this context, it's pashut. It's just the machlokus between Reb Shimon and the Chacham. So again, pshita, certainly mirubin v'nismaitu, if a majority of Am Yisrael sinned in accordance with the ruling of Beis Din, but then some people died and they're no longer the majority, and they're now the minority at this point. So Hainu pliktu Reb Shimon Rabbanan, this is machlokus between Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan. Reb Shimon would say, well, they would have had to have been aware of the scope of the sin while they were still the majority. Whereas the Chacham say, so long as they sinned, so long as the majority of the nation sinned, so they bring a parlam davar shel tzibur, even if at this point they are no longer the majority. Mu'atim v'nisrabu mai. The shaila is, what happens if they were initially a minority, okay, but then some of the non-sinners died, so that now in absolute numbers they're the majority at this point, so they kind of became the majority. So what happens now? If we gave Reb Shimon v'Rabbanan, would this be the same machlokas between Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan? I guess the rabbis would say that there would be no parlam davar shel tzibur since they were the minority, but Reb Shimon would say it depends when there is a yediyah, right? So Reb Shimon da'azu basa yediyah mechayib. So do we simply say that Reb Shimon says we go based on knowledge, which would mean that, well, if now that they're the majority, they are aware that they as the majority are sinned, so they would bring a parlam davar shel tzibur v'rabbanan dazli basu chatoya patra. But the rabbis who go based on the time of the sin, which at the time of the sin they were the minority, so they would say that there's no parlam davar shel tzibur. Or do we not say this? What do we say? But which the Gemara says, I don't know about this, because meaning we wanted to say that according to Reb Shimon, we just go based on the yediyah, okay? And therefore, as long as now they know that they are the majority and that they ate this chalev, they would bring a parlam davar shel tzibur. But the thing is, in this case, at the time that they all sinned, they were the minority. So basically, at the time they sinned, they were the minority. They were not actually chayiv in a parlam davar shel tzibur. The yediyah happened later on, once they became the majority. But at the time that they actually sinned, they were the minority. They weren't actually chayiv. Right? Meaning, if you take, for example, if you go back to the case of the Parkoin Mashiach and the Sayer Nasi. In that case, you have a situation of you have somebody prior to being appointed to his position, he sinned and he was aware. So Kilu, not only did he sin and was he chayav a korban chatas, he was also aware that he sinned. He was aware of the fact that he's chayav a korban chatas. But over here, right, meaning so there was a chiyuv korban chatas and there was an awareness of that chiyuv. But over here, at the time of the sin, there wasn't actually a chiyuv, and the yediyah is only coming at a later point, when they suddenly became the majority, but after they had already sinned. At the time they did sin, they weren't actually chayiv in anything. So when it came to the Parkoy Mashiach and the Sar Nasi, there was a double sort of chiyuv, you could say, right? They were not only were they actually chayiv to be a korban chatas, they were also aware of the fact that they were chayiv. But in this case, at the time they sinned, they weren't actually chayiv. The idea is only coming later on, when because of a set of circumstances that created the conditions, and now the majority. But at the time they sinned, they weren't actually chayiv anything. Right, so Ema de Shamasley, the Reb Shimon, I'll say that according to Reb Shimon's opinion is the Azul Af Yediyah, that he goes even according to not, right? That he additionally considers knowledge. Where the knowledge and the sin itself were bechiyuv, when by the Kohen Mashiach and the Nasi, when they sinned prior to their appointment, and they were chayiv or korban chatas, and they were aware of that chiyuv. So that's where Reb Shimon would say chayiv. Yediyah delo chato below chato mishamasle, but would Reb Shimon say that now that they're aware that they sinned, but at the same time they're not actually now sinning? They had already sinned, and at the time that they sinned, they weren't actually chayiv because they were a minority. So mishamasle, would Reb Shimon say chayiv in this case of mu'atin v'nisrabu? De'im kain laisi ki hashta. Because if that were the case, because what does Reb Shimon say? Who could tell me what does Reb Shimon say by the Par Kohen Mashiach and the Sar Nasi? Who could tell me what Reb Shimon says? What Reb Shimon says is that if, let's say, the Kohen Mashiach was unaware of his sin prior to his appointment and only becomes aware post-appointment, Reb Shimon says potter. He doesn't bring any korban. But if Reb Shimon was just all about the yediyah, so long as you find out, well, then you should bring a korban even post-appointment. But he doesn't say that, which means that according to Reb Shimon, the yediyah is connected to the sin itself. So at the time of the sin and being chayiv for the sin and being aware of that. But a yediyah in a bubble is not enough. And therefore, here, when at the time that they sinned, they were the minority. And only later on they became the majority. And later on they had this idea, but that's disconnected from the sin. Reb Shimon would not say chayiv. And Reb Shimon chata v'yediyah, but rather Reb Shimon requires both the sin and being chayiv for the sin, as well as knowledge of being chayiv for the sin. Yibalu de'asa kasha. Horu bezdin chaylev mutter. If bezdin ruled a particular type of chaylev is mutter, right? That's like the classic case we've been talking about. I feel like I pointed out already, but it's just like chaylev is like, when does anybody talk about? I don't know. Chaylev just seems to be like the go-to example when it comes to like korban chatas, but it's also like pretty abstract. What the heck is chaylev? Who, like, you would think from the Gemara that like people just like sit down and like eat plates of fat. I was like, oh, is this chaylev? Is this shuman? All of a sudden, when we talk about korban chatas, like the classic korban chatas case is chaylev. What even is that? I don't know. Like, what are the people just like eating like slabs of fat? Is that like a thing that people eat? Like, oh, you thought he was eating shuman. Turns out it was chaylev. I don't know. Friends, do you like eat fat? I don't know. Maybe it was like together with like certain kinds of meats. Maybe what it was, I don't know. I still don't know. Like back in the day, they used to eat like probably more like actual like goats and stuff like that. Like they probably would like just slaughter a goat and eat that. And you'd probably like eat most of the animal. So maybe it was like more common that you would like actually get these parts of the animal. I guess we just get like, I don't know, whatever we get. Anyways. Maybe they're like more connected to like the butchering of it. Maybe they were more connected to the butchering, right? We just kind of like go to the store, and where are we? So horu bezdin chelev mutter. So bezdin says a particular type of chelev is mutter. Okay. V'asu miut hakol. V'chazu bezdin boin. And, right, so, excuse me. So bezdin ruled a particular type of chelev is mutter. And some of the people, let's say 35% of the congregation was eating this chelev, a minority. All right. And then Bezdin says, oops, mistake. So they rescinded. V'haru v'asu miut acher. But then they ruled nochamo. They ruled once again that this, let's just say this particular type of chelev is mutter. And now another 35% of the congregation ate it. So now, if you add 35 and 35, that's 70%. 70% is more than 50%. So now what? Kevon dishte yediyis nidnu lo mitzdarif. Do we say, well, since these were two separate occurrences, two separate knowledge, two separate activities based on awareness of this ruling, so lo mitzdarif, they're separate and they don't join. Or maybe what we say is, well, Bezdin, it's one thing. Bezdin's ruling that particular chelev is mutter. People are eating it. A majority of the people did based on their ruling of Bezdin in the context of chelev. So maybe it does join together, and there would be a parallel davar shel tzibur. Vimtim saloma came the idividi chelev mitzdaref. And if you can say, well, since it's all chelev, so yeah, it does join together, and there's a majority of parallel davar shel tzibur. Miut bechelev shal gabe akeva, miut bechelev shal gabe dakin mo. What if the first ruling was about chelev on the stomach, I think? Keva, I think is stomach. But somebody's knocking something outside. Chelev, I think is, I don't know, Kerev, I think is probably, Keva is like stomach probably, but I think the article said some other word that I don't know what it is. And then the other chelev was chelev on the intestines. So now what happens there? So Hachavada came to betray Kroi Kasi Lo Mitzdarif. Well, here let's say, well, since the two types of chelev come from two different verses, I'm not sure what those verses are, but I guess they come from two different verses. So they don't join together. Maybe we say, well, still, it's two different types of chelev, so they could join together. It's all just chelev. And the two mi'uts join together to make a rov. Vimtim tzalomer shem chelevu umitzdaref. If you can say, yeah, well, it's all chelev, so it could join together. Miut bechelev umiut bedama. What if their first ruling was about chelev, the second ruling was about blood? So 35% ate based on the chelev ruling, 35% ate based on the blood ruling. Hachavadai titrei isureninu. Here, certainly, I mean, they're two separate isurs, chelev, dam. And since they're different isurs, lo mitzdarif, they don't join together. Odilma kevin, the korbanon shavim mitzdarif. But the korban for eating blood and the korban for eating chelev is the same. Korban chatos. So maybe since they have the same korban, they can join together. So came the korban shavim mitzdarif. And if we can say, well, since they have the same korban, they do join together. Miut bechelev, miut ba'avodas kochavim. What if 35% acted based on a ruling by chelev, and 35% acted based on a ruling by avodah zarah? Now, by avodah zarah, the korban is, I think it's, well, for the korban for avodah zarah, well, yeah, I guess the korban for avodah zarah of an individual, I think is a she-goat. I think it's a she-goat. So the korban shav. So where am I? So mao helcha vada ein isur and shav main korban shav. So here there are different isurs. One's avodah zarah, one is chelev. They have different korbans. The korban for chelev is a she-goat or a she-sheep, whereas the korban for avodah zarah, I think, is dafka, a she-goat. But maybe since they're both cars, they could join together. Teku, let's move on. Ibadu, they ask a kasha. Haru bezdin chelev mutter. Bezdin ruled that a particular type of chelev is permitted. But also miutakol, and a minority of the congregation then ate that chelev. Who makes also bezdin, but then the Sanhedrin that ruled that way died. Vamad bezdin acher, and a new bezdin was in town. The chazuvaru also miut acher aliban zo. Fine. And so what just happened? So v'amad bezdin acher v'chazu v'haru v'asu miut acher. Great. So Sanhedrin ruled a particular type of chelev is mutter. A minority of the people ate the chelev. The Sanhedrin then go away. The Sanhedrin then died. A new Sanhedrin came. They ruled the same way. Another miut did it. Okay. So now I'll tell you, it's going to be a takeaway, all right? So now the child is aliva demand Omer bezdin maisi lo tibailach. According to the opinion of Meir, did we do this yet? Did we say? I don't think we did. I think it's the mishnah on Daf Hey, right? The opinion of Reb Meir that bezdin is the one who offers the parliament davar shel tzibur. Well, these are two separate bezdins. Lo tibailach, the lesnu, right? The initial bezdin is not there. It's separate bezdins. Okay. According to the opinions that it's the congregation who brings the parliament davar shel tzibur, what's the halacha? Tzibur hakai. The congregation hasn't changed. Or maybe we need the yediyah, the acknowledgement of the ruling and of the sin with the original bezdin. Let's go weiter. Amr B'Yonason, excuse me, says Rabbi Yonason, Meya sheyosh v'lahoros, interesting, 100 judges that were sitting down to rule. Now, normally a Sanhedrin is 71, but this was 100. Okay. All of them need to contribute. All of them need to rule. Nobody could sit it out. It says in the pasuk by Pilam davar shel tzibur, it says, I'm reading the pasuk, so it says, all of the bezdin yishgu ache yishgu kulan. Okay, so even if it's 100, they all have to contribute in the bezdin. Nobody could abstain. I think Adas Yisrael is the bezdin, and everybody needs to contribute. Amar Rav Huna, prayer of Yoshua, Hachanam established. Taka also makes sense. Usually, we hold rubo kikulo, that a majority is considered like the entirety. But over here, we are not satisfied with simply a majority. It says kol, the entire congregation, the entire bezdin. So, therefore, even if they are 100, they must all contribute to the din. Tanan, we learned in our mishnah, Haru bezdin v'yada echad men shato, that if bezdin ruled and one of them knew that bezdin was mistaken, or Talmud v'ray lo ra, or a Talmud who was on the level of being able to paskin halacha, v'halach v'asa PM, and then this judge or this Talmud Chacham, even though they disagreed with the bezdin, they went and acted in accordance with the ruling of the bezdin that they disagreed with. Whether the bezdin did and they did it with the bezdin, whether bezdin, let's say, ate this chelev and then they ate it afterwards, or whether they simply acted on their own. and Beis Din didn't eat the chelev, only they did. How is a chayiv? So this judge or this Talmud Chacham will be chayiv to bring a korban chatas mipnei shelo told Beis Din, because it wasn't actually, they weren't relying on Beis Din, because they were aware of Beis Din's position. They didn't actually agree with it. Fine. Hai hu de chayiv ho acher potter. So we're saying that they would be chayiv, this judge or this Talmud Chacham would be chayiv, but others would be potter, wouldn't have to bring a korban chatas. But v'amai lo nigmira hora, right? But why would we consider this to be right? We're saying that they would have to, right, this judge or this Talmud Chacham would have to bring korban chatas, but others would not have to bring korban chatas because the ruling of Beis Din is valid, and there would be a parlam davar shel tzibur, and therefore individuals would not have to bring a korban chatas. The thing is, right, meaning other people wouldn't have to bring a korban chatas, but the thing is, if they weren't ruling with the rest of Beis Din, so why would it be a valid ruling, and why would other people be potter for bringing a korban chatas? So well, this judge who disagreed, nonetheless, even though he disagreed, he kind of nodded with his head, I guess, in acquiescence with the Beis Din, so he participated in that way. Tashma haru Beis Din v'adecha min sheto. Come here, a brisa that if Beis Din ruled and one of them knew that they were mistaken, and he says to them, Toyin atem, he says to them, you are mistaken. Harei paturim. Then still the people are so right. So then there's not going to be any parlam davar shel tzibur. And if he tells them, right, he says to them, you're mistaken, so then there's not going to be any parlam davar shel tzibur. So the reason is because he says to them, you are mistaken. That's why there's no parlam davar shel tzibur shasik mishtak chayim. But if they're simply silent, then they would be chayavim to bring a parlam davar shel tzibur gomer law hora, and it's considered that the ruling is complete, even though these people were quiet. V'amai halo hodu kulan. But then, I mean, if they're being quiet, so then it's not that everyone's participating. So amre ochinami kagon shekin barosho. So we say here as well, we're talking about where he nodded. He wasn't just quiet; he participated by nodding. Most of them, Misharsha has a kasha. Some Churabasena Adiva B'Shimon Gamliel, V'Adiva B'Elazar B'Tzadik Shei Omrim. The rabbis relied upon B'Shimon Gamliel and B'Elazar B'Tzadik, who said, "Ein goes in Gezerah al Hatzibur Elim Kein Rov Hatzibur Yichol Naman." But we don't make a Gezerah on the congregation unless we assume that the majority of the congregation would be able to uphold it. Rav Adabar Abba Mikro, where's the puzzle? What do we have a puzzle for this? By Me'eratim Ne'orim, Ba'oseatim Kovim, Hagoy Kulo. That it says in the puzzle, Hagoy Kulo, the entire nation. V'acha dichsiv, Hagoy Kulo, V'ruba Kekuladam. Over here it says Hagoy Kulo, the entire nation, and yet we're saying Rubo Kekulo. So meaning we had said earlier this proof, right, that well, because the pasuk says Vim kol adas Yisrael, so you see it's all of it. But here we have a pasuk that says Agoy Kulo, and still we're saying it means Ruba Kekulo. So V'ha alcha dichsiv Agoy Kulo, V'ruba Kekuladam. So Tiyuvta, Dirib Yonis and Tiyuvta, so this is a kasha and Reb Yonis, who had said that from the fact that it says kol, it means even 100. So ve'elamai kol adas, the kamer of Manas, and what do we then learn out from kol adas? So achikamer im ika kulam havioro. If there's a full Sanhedrin, 71, so not if there's 100, but if there's a full Sanhedrin of 71, so then it's considered hora. But if there isn't a full Sanhedrin of 71, then no, lo aviora, then it wouldn't be considered a ruling. Amr B'Shua says, Yud sheyozim, then when you have 10 people who sit down to judge, koler talui b'tzaver kulan, there is a chain, what's the word I'm thinking of? Figurative, I guess, maybe chain that's considered to be around their necks. Pshita, this is obvious. Of course, sitting in din is a serious thing. Even student in front of his Rebbe and he recognizes that the Rebbe is making a mistake, he also has a responsibility to speak up. Rav Huna ki havanofik levei dina. Rav Huna, when he would go to judge, Maisi asar tanoi devei Rav lekame, he would bring 10 students, 10 other people to join him. Kiechi de nimtayan shiva mikshur, to make it like a splinter from a beam, right? Kelu, if he is alone, if Rav Huna is alone judging, well then all of the burden is on him if he makes a mistake. But if there's like 10 other people there, well then they can like spread out the responsibility among more people, and they each have less level of responsibility. Rav Ashi kava maisi trefsa lekame. Rav Ashi, when they would bring a treifa before him to check to see if it's kosher or not, maisi asar taboche imata mechase, he would bring 10 butchers from the town where he lived, mata mechasya, most of kame, and he would have them sit before him. Also to kind of spread out the responsibility, he figured that if there is like 10 of them there, and if there is a question about a treifa, he's got 10 butchers there, then he can kind of diffuse the responsibility among the whole group. That was Daf Gimel, Daf 3 of Masechta Horayos Shish. The first few Dafs of Masechta Horayos are quite intense. Okay, on Daf Gimel of Masechta Horayos, the first part of the Daf was about determining the author of our Mishnah, because of course our Mishnah had said that even an individual who acted based on the ruling of Bezdin would be potter from bringing a korban chatas. Now there's no davar shel tzibur since it's an individual, but still, says the author of our Mishnah, he would also be exempt from bringing a korban chatas as well, because he was relying upon Bezdin. Who is the author of that? First, we wanted to say that that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and that the Chacham would disagree and say that the individual would bring a korban chatas since there's no davar shel tzibur. We then wanted to suggest that maybe it's Rav Meir, but that kind of fell apart. And we then got into lots of technical details of par, helim, davar, shel, tzibur. We had a bunch of tekus and things like that. Yeah, things that are pretty technical. Well, that was Daf Gimel of Masechta Horayos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.